you have the approval to whether or not something, if something is not pleasing or appealing to you, whether or not to put it on the agenda.
No, that's not how it's done, Council.
So how, as we clearly see, there's like 5 items from last meeting that's not on this agenda, and as well as like we ran into this problem like numerous of times. Items not being on the agenda, and I know that we email them to Ms. Dickey. So it runs into either Ms. Dickey either is not putting it on the agenda, or else the items in which we're wanting are not being put on the agenda.
Well, my objection is to the way you stated it. That's what my objection is to. Now, if you ask if I have final on the agenda, yes.
So
What's your next question?
what does it mean by you have final of the agenda?
Final is pretty clear. Before it goes out, I generally try to look at it. So sometimes things do occur. For example, I'll give you an example. You mentioned you wanted to oversee doing some job descriptions. Well, if you look at the charter and city ordinances and the fact that you've never had, that's not under your purview. So that didn't fall on the agenda because it doesn't fall for you to do. So it'd be nice if you asked for something regarding council responsibilities. That's the mayor's function.
I've also asked you time and time again that you said that you please don't insult me, and you asked me not to do the same for you, and which I don't do the same. So I'm going to ask that you don't do that. Secondly, our role is, as council members, is to, as you just stated, represent action. Could meetings be, like, could we get agenda items? Earlier, you said it is city council role to write the policy, to change the policy. So being that we don't have job descriptions, I don't see how hard it is for me to go look up cities to our degree, which is the same thing as Dickey is doing with communication with other cities, to see how their job description and guidelines go, to bring it and present it to council. That way we can go and approve and go through the process. I don't see what's different. So, but back to my previous question. When you, because I think you've been quite funny when you said final is final. So to me, when I hear the word final, that means you have the final approval. That means you can take off, put back on, add anything that you would like. So when you say final, what does final mean as far as when we send in items in which that we would like, or items have been voted on the previous meeting? How come they still continue to not be put on the agenda? Is it because you have the final say and you don't want them to be on the agenda, or like what is the issue in which we keep running into?
I'm not following you, Council. I answered your question and you want to re-ask it in a different way. I answered. We have accidents that come through. Me and Ms. Dickey are running as council, so eloquently pointed out to me. We do not have much of a staff because while we're doing this, we're doing other things. We have lines of people out here. We're dealing with a lot of other issues. And when accidents happen, something's not on the agenda, as you keep stating, it's happened hundreds of times. You haven't even been here long enough for hundreds of times. So you're stating things that don't even exist. But if you ask, do I have final approval to the extent that the agenda goes out, the answer is yes. That's a part of the mayor's responsibilities in the operation and administration of the city.
Does that supersede us, even though we vote?
Well, and that's where, are you asking me?
Yes, no,
I know you're looking at me, I just want to make sure. So, as we talked about earlier, you have tools as council members to get an item on an agenda form. That is by application of 3 council members. You can get an item and post it on the front door and have a meeting. So that's how you do it. But in terms of the responsibility between the mayor and the city secretary's duty is to post the agenda. So the mayor's responsibility is to have an agenda to be posted. So whether or not he physically types it, he dictates it, he sends handwritten notes of what he wants done. It could be one of the administrative assistants in the office that actually types it, but he is the person who is responsible for putting items in. If you look at your charter, again, the mayor has prerogatives and authority acting independently of or in concert with council to carry out his duties under the charter in the state of Texas. So some of the questions you are asking and that you wanted to bring up earlier in the meeting have to do with his discretion and his prerogative. And so what you're asking him why he has done what he's done or why he's doing what he's doing, which is not, it's not a policy question, so to speak. You have the policy, in terms of the rules, and so it's sort of like beating a dead horse.
So he can do as he please.
He can't do as he please. He can't break the law. But in terms of performing his functions, you have sort of a situation where if he does not perform his function as to posting agenda items on the agenda for the meeting, you have alternatives to have an agenda item on a meeting. So there, so there's that's the checks and balance.
Goes to the city secretary, right?
No, she doesn't have, that's what I'm saying. She doesn't have to, for the city council members, 3 city council members, under the city charter, to call a special meeting with an agenda. You can do it yourself. You don't have to have her involved. You can ask her, would you please post this? And would you please, do the other functions that happen when a meeting is being set up to make sure that this room is available and you have all that you need to have a meeting. But separation of power means the mayor is responsible for overseeing the employees and the operations of the city, period. City council is responsible for policy making and legislative actions. So sort of what you described earlier, if you want to do some work to assist the city in doing some administrative work, that's not your role as a city council member. Okay? So you have this overarching governmental policy or precept that you have a legislative policy-making role. And so how the mayor does what he does, the city council does not control. When he implements policy and legislative actions that you pass. That, you just don't control that. And if he chooses to, and within his discretion, to do something as he's asked to do, then that's fine. But when he doesn't do something that properly, there's a motion, there's a second, there's something that says on a future agenda for the next meeting, we want this agenda item, and then he doesn't put it on there, the recourse, what I'm saying is the recourse you have is to use your power under the authority of the charter and the state constitution to have a meeting with that item on it without him being the person to do the agenda.
Councilman Rowland.
Thank you for explaining that. Some of us, so one of our key issues, it is not to supersede the mayor's authority. I think the example that Councilman Jones used was in reference to job description that Ms. Dickey talked about in her report. If council says, hey, do we have a job description for every employee in this building? And the response is no. Our policies, our personnel policy says that we should have a folder and have all these things, which is our legislative part. Now, if the mayor just says, well, and so Mr. Councilman Jones has just been saying, hey, all I want to do is help assist, not supervise anyone to do it. He wants to actually help come up with the job description and then give it to the necessary person, which is Ms. Dickey. And because people aren't seeing that, there's this clash of you're overstepping my role and boundaries. So our first part is if we're, in our personnel policy says we're supposed to do 1 through 10, and we're only doing 1 through 5, we're saying that we're trying to, again, shore up, help, and assist in this process.
Right, and you do that through the mechanisms and the framework that you have in your roles as a council member So the first thing that comes to my mind is you establish a council committee to review job descriptions. Okay? That way, it's something you have the authority to do, and she can come and present these to your committee. But after all of that happens, it still has to go through the mayor to see if he approves these job descriptions. So I think you can achieve what you want to achieve. It's just using the proper framework to get there.
Ms. Dickey, will you make a note to add that to the next agenda? On that note, since it's been stated that the mayor makes all these changes in between, at our last meeting, the entire council voted to have a budget meeting. I believe it was Councilman Randall's motion, but I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, at 4 o'clock 2 Sundays ago. Did you make that motion about the budget meeting?
Yeah.
I think so. Okay, well, after that, after the full body voted unanimously to have a budget-only meeting, Councilman Rowland, Jones, and Wallace submitted changes to that meeting that the body had voted on unanimously to add Panther Hill Apartments to an agenda that was fully voted on. So while you're saying that the mayor makes these changes, I want to point out, council, as recently as a week ago, all three of you submitted changes that, because of the back and forth, wound up having the meeting entirely canceled, because I don't know about all the other ones, but I know Councilman Rowlands came in at 4:30. That was 30 minutes after the set time. Now, my only point is this. If you're going to accuse the mayor of changing things that y'all had voted on, I just want to make sure you understand you stop voting in between meetings and submitting changes that the entire body has voted on. I was out of town. Ms. Dickey tried to accommodate, and because of the Open Meetings Act, there was an issue where the entire meeting had to be canceled.
That entire meeting was canceled because students, as you want to say, we're supposed to do our role. So it was things that had happened with Panther Hill in which an email was sent out for students not to be moved in or processed, which we have information that was presented today, that students were not supposed to be moving in. So due to the fact in which we kept emailing and asking, hey, can we have the emergency meeting? Or maybe could we have a town hall meeting? Can we do a special meeting? Maybe could we move forward? Could we all bring everyone to the table so that way we can get a process going, so that way it wouldn't fall back upon the city as well as the citizens living in a place that don't meet standards and codes. So that's like, I hear everything in which you're saying, that it's a process. But it's like after so long in which you try to do a process, like what the process is it for you, and which you have stated today, which there's another process in which we have a trial, which is setting our own agenda, but that's the reason in which that meeting didn't take place, because other things happened with the city at the drop of a dime. So we was trying to take care of two issues at one time.
And for the record, it's not our fault that the meeting didn't happen. We did our due diligence in sending in the email, so to put the blame on us for a project and conflict that has been speculated for months and that has always been put off the agenda continuously over and over and over again. I'm sorry that the city council want to make sure that our structures are sound and safe for the citizens, but if you feel like that's enough blame for us have a meeting canceled, I'm just here to tell you that was not the reason.
Mayor and council, if I can just address one thing, because I now understand why you wanted to ask questions for the Panther, the introduction of the staff and all of that. So, you know, one of the things about the Open Meetings Act is you may know what it is you have an issue with that you want to discuss at a meeting. But what you put on the agenda tells the public what the issue is that you want to discuss. So the way I hear it and understand it is you wanted to know the status of the permit and inspection for that property, because that's the only role that the city has that you have any city business about. Otherwise, it's entirely a private property situation. And so if moving forward, if you wanted to comply with the Open Meetings Act, if you wanted to have a discussion about that project in terms of the permit and inspection, which is the police authority of the city on that private property, you would put that you want to discuss and take action on the permit and inspection of such and such property. And that way, the citizens know there might be an issue with the permit and inspection of that property. So if they're interested, they would show up to give input to you about that. But the people who actually, you can't go by innuendo, rumor, and all of that. You have to have the professionals on the city side that are hired and paid by the city to give you what that information is. The private property owner does not have to show up to a city council meeting to answer your questions. And so the way I understood it earlier in the meeting, under the Open Meetings Act, this was an opportunity for them to introduce the players, the staff, and actually it sounded like they were kind of giving kudos to some of the people involved on the city side for helping them get this project going. So that's how they present. I'm just telling you
the first piece.
that's how they presented it. And so I'm talking about the apartment people with all the manager and assistant manager and all those people. That's how they presented it. So it wasn't the same agenda item as saying we need to know, do you have proper permits? Do you have inspections in place? Blah, blah, blah. That's a totally different discussion.
And which we understand. Oh, you can go ahead.
I think when we talk about the Open Meetings Act, I think this is why we're having this discussion, because that is a particular subject that we've requested probably since December. In city council meetings where we voted for it to be on the subsequent agenda, and here we are in August, and we still weren't allowed to have that conversation.
Until today.
And then,
And you told us not to talk.
and then on
But it
Friday,
wasn't posted that way.
and then on Friday, we get an email from our attorney saying that there's this magnitude of issues, and these were the issues that we have been trying to ask questions about since December. And so that's where we come to the disconnect about when we take open meetings requests and how we talk about the council being able to do its legislative work. How does the council do that if we can't get items, especially because what we did, we put hundreds of students' lives in danger because we didn't do our due diligence of what we were supposed to do as far as making sure that apartment complex was good. And to be honest, if Bureau Veritas, Chief Bordeaux, attorney hadn't done what they did, they would have moved those students in there.
So Councilmember Rand, was here earlier. I know we had some discussion earlier about the fact that for a special meeting under your charter, your city charter, by application of 3 council members, you can call a special meeting about a particular subject. And so what I'm saying to you is, on Friday, when you heard about it, you guys could have submitted for a special meeting, say that the special meeting could have been at 5 o'clock today, just to talk about that project, but how you worded it. And so when we got to that item earlier this evening, how it was worded, the item wasn't worded in a way that said you were going to talk about permitting and inspection issues for the project. And so we would never, from your city attorney standpoint, say that the city endangered any citizens, students, humans' lives, because the responsibility, and I want to make this point as strongly as I can, when a private company or person builds a building and they invite people to live in that building or to shop in that building or do anything in that building, the liability for anything happening to those people lies with the private property owner,
Same
not
thing.
I'm
the
not,
city.
I'm not
Not the
speaking about-
city. So-
I'm not speaking about liability, but we all know perception and reality, right? So if something was to happen to those kids, they're not gonna associate it with Panther Hill Apartments, they're gonna associate it with the city of Prairie. And so even though they're liable, we're gonna receive the backlash as a city. And then when it comes out that they didn't go through the proper permitting channels, then whether they're liable or not, it still makes us look like we're not handling our business as a city. And we all know people's perceptions are the reality. So we have to control the narrative as much as we can. And that's all we try to do is make sure that we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's from our position and our standpoint. So we're not putting the people that we're sending out to do this work, we're not putting the city, or we're not putting the students, even the developers, we're not putting them in a precarious situation. But
Right, so.
we have to have the opportunity to have those conversations, and that's the issue. And that's just one issue, right?
Right.
This is one topic.
So the Open Meetings Act allows you to have conversations about and take action on it within the parameters of what your responsibilities are. And so what I'm saying is, today at 9/11, we can go post a handwritten meeting agenda on the window out there that in 72 hours at 9/11, you're going to meet to discuss the status of the permanent inspection of that property. And you can have that discussion. Now, you may not be able to get the private individuals here to have that discussion, but you could have the city staff here. The second mechanism you have is on a regular basis to have a departmental report about all the permits and inspections for projects in the city. And so what Councilmember Jones had an issue about was he wanted to try to ask questions in the departmental reports when there was no departmental report on permits and inspections. So, you know, I'm just saying you do have some mechanisms to help you get to where you want to get, but the Open Meetings Act, you have to also comply with that. And so that's where when you start talking about your responsibilities and public perception and reality, sometimes all those rumors and innuendo can be totally false, but they build up to where you're thinking you have to have an entire meeting on this one thing just so the public can, you know, vent why they're frustrated with a private property owner. So we, as public servants, we don't want to dissolve the responsibility of the private individuals in terms of their duties to comply with all rules and regulations, regardless of whether or not we tell them to. They have a responsibility to do that.
Yeah,
Councilwoman Williams, your turn.
Can I talk about that day, or can I not?
No, we're talking about the Open Meetings Act. So this is the context of this conversation, agenda item number 14.
Well, there have been some
And
requests.
So we're using examples, but we can't get into details about a particular thing.
And may I ask, because I know since I've been sitting on council that executive session is listed, but it don't always go into like detail upon like what would be discussed, and it's always like, oh, at the end of the meeting, well, we don't have any executive session like to discuss. If it was the case that we receive information upon factual information upon, let's say, let's use for example Panther Hill, how like they might not have a temporary CEO and things of that such, the way it went about it was the wrong way. Could we possibly use executive session to
So
discuss?
there's a whole number, and I don't even know how many exceptions there are to have a closed meeting. The one that you have today is consultation with attorney. That means you would ask me about contemplated or pending litigation, or I would advise you on something that is confidential that, you know, I had to have a closed meeting. So that means I'm the person who's actually doing the advising in that meeting, not council members just talking to each other. But there are certain exceptions where you do have to be specific. One of those is the personnel exception. So if you wanted to talk about any employee or appointee of the city, you would have to name either, this city is small enough that you could say chief of police, for example. But if you were trying to, and I know he's a very strong, confident man, so I can use him as an example. If you were gonna try to terminate the chief of police, you would have to put his name on there. You know, there's certain things, if you just wanna talk about his performance, you know what I'm saying, like you're doing a performance review, you might say, performance review of the chief of police. But whenever it's a personnel matter, you do have to be specific about who you are talking about in executive session. And that employee gets to say, I don't want to have it in closed session, I want to have it in open session. So that's just an example for you. It's not a one rule fits all, it depends on the particular exception and how much community interest there is in that particular subject. The more community interest there is, the more specific you have to be about what you're talking about.
All right, so you said today we could call executive session for what? Like
A
to
consultation
ask,
with
to ask-
attorney.
To
A consultation.
ask, how should we move forward
Well-
about certain things?
No, only about consultation for litigation
Yeah.
or pending claims or liability of
city
the
claim.
city.
So currently,
So-
So,
And otherwise, there are some circumstances where I need to advise you confidentially about a council, like something could have happened in here tonight. You know, someone dropped dead. And I might want to advise you, okay, you do have liability, you don't, here's how we need to proceed to see what happened, how that person ended up on the floor, that kind of thing. So that does not cover when there's a problem in the community and you just don't want to wait 72 hours
No,
to
well-
post it.
what if we already have sent a letter and like we need council opinion upon like what is the next step?
But
Because we sent-
that's not the type of thing that would be talked about in executive session, because what you're talking about is more a policy decision about how to deal with an operational issue, meaning if there were things that in the permitting process, this example that we're using, okay, in the permitting process that didn't happen, that should have happened, and how the city is supposed to be doing this process, that's not an executive session. And everything that I've heard to this point, let me just say this. Everything that I've heard to this point, before this meeting and during this meeting, I have not heard anything that suggests to me the city has any liability that needs to be discussed in an executive session.
And I think we're finished on the Open Meetings Act. On open meetings, go ahead.
In open meetings, part of our dilemma, when we're communicating, because we all can't be, because we don't want to violate the Open Meetings Act. When we're submitting something, our procedure or protocol to get something submitted, you described if we're going to do it individually, if we send it to the city secretary or the mayor and go through that process. We had, or for example, there was some legal action that took place and we wanted to get an update with our attorney on what this legal action was. That would be something that we could go, we can go into executive session about.
It is, depending on what you mean by legal action.
When we ask our attorney to draft a letter and send a letter to a potential business owner that you can't occupy or do these things unless you have these things.
So, your example that you're using, I would not consider that an appropriate action for city council.
Okay.
So that's an operational issue that should be handled at the department level, because what you're doing is you're following the rules and regulation for whatever that function is. Okay, so for example, if code enforcement officer has to go and inspect a property and develop a list of violations for that property, council cannot instruct the code enforcement officer to send a notice of violation for a particular thing. Even though you might walk down, which I did when I was here a couple years ago, went on a tour with the code enforcement folks, And literally half the roof was, I could see that half the wall and half the roof was, clearly the building was structurally damaged. Even though I saw that, that's not my role. The code enforcement officer has to issue the notice of violations. Okay, so, so in your example, as I'm saying, that would not be something that would be for the city council to take action on. Okay? Whereas the mayor, in his role as CEO, he could actually contact the city attorney and ask the city attorney if he or she would work with the, whatever employee is, to draft a letter to go out to somebody about something, okay? That's a totally different line of authority.
Correct. If we have a policy that is, that to occupy a building, or.
I think we're getting, I'm sorry, but, because we've been using this example, the agenda item is for the Open Meetings Act and things about the Open Meetings Act. So if we get too far into the weeds about specific
I got you.
things,
So I guess
we're
my
off the topic.
question is around, what is the threshold for an emergency? So open meeting, we had some issues with, what is the level of, what is the threshold to meet an emergency meeting that talks to some of the examples we gave? So what?
So, under the Open Meetings Act, and I didn't come prepared to
Mhm.
go into this, because I thought you guys were going to do this in training another day, but the Open Meeting Act, for the purposes where you can have less than 72 hours notice, there is a statute section that deals with that. You can rest assured if there is a calamity where there's a flood, a hurricane, tornado, something happens to where the water supply is damaged and you can't have supply water to the citizens, something like that, then you could have an emergency meeting to deal with that situation. So it's very, I mean, there could be a situation where, because of you have record heat and you have citizens dying in their houses, and you need to implement an emergency plan to provide cool shelters for people. So it's something like that.
One more question. Just for clarification, so just kind of piggyback on this quickly. So there's an emergency meeting where you can call a meeting with 24-hour notice. That's something that's like life-threatening or something like that. But then there's still
For the population,
Right.
not for an individual.
right.
One thing.
And so then there's still the council, where the council can call a